Salvatore De Luca's car moved through the Sicilian night like a predator returning to its territory. No headlights, no announcement, no warning. The iron gates of the coastal villa recognized the vehicle's signature and parted silently, swallowing the black sedan into the marble courtyard. Salt wind whipped off the Tyrrhenian Sea, carrying the sharp taste of brine and old blood. Memories this house wore like scars. He stepped out alone. His driver knew better than to follow. The villa stood pale against the darkening sky, its windows reflecting nothing, revealing nothing. 2 years of silence had turned this place into a mausoleum with marble floors and imported furniture. Beautiful, cold, dead. Salvatore straightened his tailored jacket, the fabric whispering against the shoulder holster he never removed. His reflection caught in the car window. Sharp cheekbones, salt and pepper stubble, eyes that had stopped registering surprise somewhere between his 20th kill and his 40th birthday. Sicily had taught him that surprise was a weakness men like him couldn't afford. Control was survival. Silence was safety. And this house, his fortress, was supposed to embody both. He moved toward the entrance, footsteps measured, breathing controlled. The security panel blinked green without him touching it. Inside, the foyer stretched before him like a cathedral, all white stone and arched doorways. The kind of architecture that made sound travel in ways that could get a man killed if he wasn't careful. Everything was exactly as he'd left it 3 days ago, exactly as it had been for 2 years. Then he heard it. Laughter. Salvatore froze mid-step, one hand instinctively moving to his side, fingers brushing the grip of his gun. His pulse kicked hard against his ribs, the same hammer-strike rhythm he'd felt in firefights, in ambushes, in moments when death wore a friendly face. But this wasn't gunfire. This was laughter. Small, bright, alive, impossible. The sound came from somewhere deep in the house, riding the air like a ghost he didn't believe in. Not echoes, not imagination, not the television someone forgot to turn off. Real laughter, children's laughter, his children's laughter. Salvatore's breath stopped. For 2 full years, his twin daughters had been silent. Not quiet, silent. They hadn't spoken, hadn't laughed, hadn't made a sound beyond breathing and the shuffle of small feet on marble floors. Doctors with prestigious degrees and empty solutions. Therapists with soft voices and useless theories. Priests with prayers that bounced off cathedral ceilings. Money couldn't fix it. Power couldn't command it. Threats couldn't force it. And now? The laughter came again, closer, layered with something else. Singing. A woman's voice, low and steady, weaving through the children's sounds like thread through fabric. Salvatore's fingers tightened on the gun. He followed the sound through the house, past the sitting room where his wife's portrait still hung, past the dining hall where no one had eaten together in 24 months, toward the one place that should have been empty. The kitchen. His hand touched the door, and everything he thought he knew about his life shattered. The kitchen door swung open. Time stopped. Salvatore De Luca, the man who'd walked through gunfire without flinching, who'd stared down cartel bosses and Russian oligarchs without blinking, stood frozen in his own doorway, unable to process what his eyes were showing him. Sunlight poured through the arched windows, turning the white marble counters into pools of liquid gold. The smell of fresh bread and butter hung in the air, warm and impossibly domestic. And in the center of it all, like a painting he'd never commissioned and couldn't look away from, his daughters were laughing. Laughing. Chiara stood barefoot on the kitchen island, her small hands clapping in rhythm, cheeks flushed pink, dark curls bouncing with each movement. Her eyes, his wife's eyes, the ones he couldn't look at without bleeding, were shining with something he'd forgotten existed. Joy. Sophia sat perched on someone's shoulders, gripping fistfuls of dark hair, squealing with delight as she bounced up and down. Her yellow hair ribbon had come loose and hung askew, her bare feet kicking the air in time with the song they were singing. And between them, holding them, protecting them, making them alive again, was the maid, Lucia Romano. Her white apron was dusted with flour, a smear of butter on her sleeve. Her dark hair, usually pulled back in a severe bun, had come loose in soft waves around her face. She stood with military straight posture, even while supporting a child on her shoulders, one hand steadying Sophia, the other extended toward Chiara on the counter. They were singing together, a soldier's lullaby. Nina nana, Nina o, questo bimbo a chi lo do. Salvatore knew that song. His wife had sung it when the twins were babies, her voice soft in the darkness of their bedroom, trying to soothe two crying infants while he was out doing things he could never wash off his hands. The men he'd served with in the army, before Sicily, before blood became business, had sung it in bunkers and on transport trucks, voices rough with exhaustion and fear. It was a song for soldiers and mothers, for people who understood what it meant to protect something fragile in a world designed to break it. And now, this woman, this maid he'd hired 6 weeks ago and barely noticed, was singing it to his daughters. While they laughed, while they lived. Lucia spun slowly, Sophia shrieking with happiness, and that's when she saw him. Her body went still. Not startled, controlled. The kind of stillness that came from training, not surprise. Her dark eyes met his across the kitchen, and for one suspended moment, Salvatore saw something in them he hadn't expected. Recognition, not fear, not submission. Recognition of what he was, and zero apology for what she'd done. The twins noticed the change instantly. Chiara's laughter cut off mid-note. Sophia's hands stopped pulling Lucia's hair. Both girls turned toward the doorway where their father stood, and the light in their faces died like someone had blown out a candle. Their small bodies went rigid. Chiara's smile collapsed. Sophia's fingers clenched tighter, but not in play, in fear. Salvatore felt it like a blade between his ribs. His daughters were afraid of him, and they trusted her. "Papa?" Chiara whispered, the first word she'd spoken in his presence in 730 days. Not daddy, not with love. Papa, formal, distant, careful. The word hung in the air between them like an accusation. Lucia didn't move, didn't step back, didn't apologize or explain. She just stood there, positioned between Salvatore and his daughters, her body angled in a way that was almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to anyone who'd ever been trained in protection. She was shielding them. From him. Salvatore's briefcase slipped from his hand and hit the marble floor with a crack that made both twins flinch. "What?" he said slowly, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "Is going on here?" The laughter was gone. The magic was broken, and the silence that rushed back in felt heavier than anything he'd ever carried. Lucia Romano moved before the fear could fully settle in the twins' eyes. She lifted Sophia down from her shoulders with practiced efficiency. The movement smooth and controlled, then extended her hand to Chiara on the counter. Both girls came to her immediately, instinctively, the way soldiers moved toward cover when shots were fired. They pressed against her legs. Small hands gripped her flour-dusted apron. Lucia placed herself between them and Salvatore De Luca, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "They were helping me clean, sir," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, calm. The kind of calm that came from talking to people while their insides were on the outside, while helicopters couldn't land, while the world was ending in real time. Helping. The word hit Salvatore like an insult. "Helping," he repeated, his jaw tight. "That's what you call this?" He gestured at the kitchen, the scattered flour, the butter dish, the wooden spoon on the counter. The bread cooling on the rack, evidence of chaos, of disorder, of things happening in his house without his knowledge or permission. "Yes, sir." Lucia didn't look away. "They were helping me prepare the evening meal." "They were laughing." The accusation came out sharper than he intended, and he saw both twins flinch against Lucia's legs. She didn't flinch. Her hand moved to rest gently on Chiara's head, a gesture so subtle Salvatore almost missed it. Protection and comfort in one motion. "Is laughter not allowed, sir?" Lucia asked. The question landed like a slap. Salvatore's pride flared hot and immediate. No one spoke to him that way. Not his men, not his enemies, not the politicians he owned, or the judges he'd bought. Certainly not a maid he'd hired through an agency 6 weeks ago and paid barely enough attention to learn her last name. "You forget your place," he said, his voice dropping into the register that made grown men reconsider their life choices. Lucia Romano met his eyes without blinking. "My place," she said quietly, "is keeping them safe." The air in the kitchen changed. Salvatore felt it in his chest, something unfamiliar and dangerous rising up from a place he'd buried years ago. Not anger. Anger he understood. Anger was useful. This was different. This was jealousy. Raw and ugly and impossible to deny. This woman, this stranger, had done something he couldn't do with all his money, all his power, all his connections and threats, and desperate middle-of-the-night deals with God. She'd made his daughters feel safe enough to laugh. And they still didn't feel safe with him. "Papa," Chiara whispered again, and the formality in that single word cracked something inside him. He looked down at his daughters, really looked at them, and saw what he'd been refusing to see for 2 years. They were terrified of him, not because he'd hurt them. He'd never raised a hand to his children, never would, but because he was exactly what the world said he was. A monster in an expensive suit. And monsters didn't get to have laughter in their houses. "You're fired," Salvatore heard himself say, the words coming from somewhere cold and final. "Pack your things. Leave tonight." He expected Lucia to argue, to plead, to do what people always did when he made decisions about their lives. Instead, she went very still, and his daughters started to scream. "No!" The sound shattered the kitchen. Chiara and Sofia threw themselves at Lucia with the kind of desperation Salvatore had only seen in war, people clinging to the last safe thing in a world coming apart. "No, no, no, please, Papa, please!" Sofia was sobbing now, her small body shaking. Chiara wrapped herself around Lucia's leg like she could physically prevent what was happening. "Don't let her go," Chiara begged, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't make her go. Please!" They were speaking, full sentences, because of her, and he was taking her away. Lucia Romano knelt slowly, her knees touching the cold marble floor. She'd knelt like this before, in desert sand, beside men who were dying, in hospital corridors, when the news was bad and the families needed someone to hold them while they broke. In the darkness of her own apartment, when the nightmares made sleep impossible and the only position that felt honest was surrender. She peeled the twins' fingers gently from her apron, one small hand at a time, whispering into their hair. Breathe, Picole. Just breathe. Sophia was hiccuping through her sobs, her face buried against Lucia's shoulder. Chiara held on with a grip that would leave marks, her whole body trembling. You promised, Chiara whispered. You promised you'd stay. Lucia closed her eyes. She had promised. 6 weeks ago, on the first morning, when both girls had hidden under the dining room table and refused to come out. When the previous maid had quit in frustration, claiming the children were impossible and disturbed. Lucia had gotten down on her hands and knees, looked under that table, and seen herself. 2 small faces, hollow eyes. The kind of silence that came from watching something die that you couldn't save. She'd crawled under the table with them, sat in the darkness, and hummed. The lullaby had come out without thinking. Ninna Nana, Ninna Oh. The same song she'd sung in Afghanistan, in a field hospital outside Kandahar, when a 19-year-old private from Naples was bleeding out faster than she could work, and all she could do was hold his hand and sing so he wouldn't die alone. The same song she'd sung when the IED took out her transport, and she'd woken up in the wreckage with 6 men who would never wake up at all. The same song the Italian government had erased from her file when they declared her psychologically unfit for service and cut her loose without ceremony, without benefits, without anything but a notification that her pay would stop in 30 days. Thank you for your service, Captain Romano. We'll take it from here. Except they didn't take it from anywhere. They just left her. No counseling, no transition support. No acknowledgement that she'd spent 3 years putting soldiers back together, while mortars fell and supply lines collapsed and politicians argued about budgets. Just a closed file and a canceled health insurance policy. So she'd learned to clean houses, to fold towels, to polish silver and mop floors and keep her head down and pretend the skills she'd earned in blood and fire meant nothing in a world that had moved on without her. She'd taken the job at the De Luca villa because the agency said it paid well and asked no questions. She'd expected cold rooms and colder people. She'd expected to be invisible. What she hadn't expected was to find 2 children trapped in the same silence that had swallowed her whole. Under that dining room table 6 weeks ago, Lucia had kept humming. Chiara had stopped crying first. Then Sophia had crawled closer. By the end of the first week, they'd started humming with her. By the end of the second week, Chiara had touched her hand. By the 3rd week, Sophia had climbed into her lap. By the 4th week, they were singing words. By the 6th week, they were laughing. Lucia had watched them come back to life one small moment at a time, and she'd felt something she thought had died in the desert. Purpose. Not orders. Not duty. Purpose. These children needed her the way those soldiers had needed her. Completely. Desperately. With no one else coming to help. And she'd promised she wouldn't leave them. Now, kneeling on Salvatore De Luca's marble floor with 2 sobbing children in her arms and a man who looked at her like she'd committed treason, Lucia Romano made a choice. She stood up, slowly, with both twins still clinging to her. She looked directly at Salvatore, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every promise she'd ever made to people who were counting on her not to break. I'm proud of you, she murmured to the girls, pressing kisses to their hair. So proud. You're the bravest girls I've ever known? Sophia's grip tightened. Don't go, she whispered. Please, Lucia, please. I have to, Lucia said gently. But listen to me. What you did today. The laughing, the singing, that's yours now. He can't take that away. No one can. She peeled their hands off carefully. One finger at a time, her own eyes burning. Then she stood at her full height, shoulders back, chin up. Military posture she'd earned in a war her own country had forgotten. She walked past Salvatore De Luca without another word, without apology, without looking back. The twins screamed behind her. But Lucia Romano knew something about leaving people behind that hurt worse than staying would. Sometimes walking away was the only mercy left. The door closed behind Lucia Romano with a soft click. The screaming stopped, not because the twins had calmed down, because they'd run out of air. Salvatore stood alone in the kitchen with his daughters collapsed on the floor, sobbing into the marble where Lucia had knelt moments before. Their small bodies shook with the kind of grief he'd only seen at funerals. This wasn't a tantrum. This was loss. "Chiara," he started, his voice rough. "Sophia!" "I hate you!" Chiara's voice cracked on the words, her face red and streaked with tears and snot, her eyes wild with pain he'd put there. Sophia just sobbed harder, curling into herself like she was trying to disappear. Salvatore reached for them. Both girls scrambled backward. They looked at him like he was a stranger. No, worse, like he was exactly what he was, the man who'd killed the only safe thing in their world. He didn't sleep that night. At 2 a.m., he sat in his office with a bottle of scotch he didn't drink and a loaded gun he didn't need, staring at the security footage from the kitchen on his laptop. Rewinding, watching, rewinding again. There, Lucia lifting Sophia onto her shoulders. There, Chiara clapping and laughing. There, all three of them singing that goddamn lullaby his wife used to hum. There, the moment his daughters had been alive for the first time in 2 years. And there, his own face in the doorway, frozen and stupid and so fucking blind he wanted to put his fist through the screen. He'd seen a threat, a stranger with his children, someone taking something that belonged to him. But what he'd actually seen, what he'd been too proud and too damaged to recognize, was love. The kind of love that didn't ask for anything, that didn't need power or money or promises. That just showed up and hummed songs in the darkness until broken things started to heal. And he'd fired her, like she was replaceable, like what she'd done was nothing. Salvatore's hands shook as he closed the laptop. At 3 a.m., he heard footsteps in the hallway. Small, hesitant. He looked up to find Chiara standing in his office doorway in her pajamas, her face swollen from crying, her hair a mess. "Chiara," he started. "It's late. You should—" "I hate you," she said again, quieter this time, more final. "I know," Salvatore said, and the admission cost him something he didn't have words for. "You made her leave?" "I did. She was the only one who—" Chiara's voice broke. "She was the only one who made it stop hurting." Salvatore's throat closed. "What hurts, bambina?" Chiara looked at him with eyes too old for 7 years. "Everything," she whispered. "Everything hurts all the time. And Lucia made it stop. She didn't make us talk, or tell us we should be happy, or say Mama's in a better place. She just stayed, and you made her go." She turned and walked away. Left him sitting there with the truth of what he'd done. At 4 a.m., Salvatore made a call. "Find her," he told Marco, his head of security. "Lucia Romano. Find out everything. Boss, it's 4 in the morning. Now." By sunrise, Marco was back in his office with a file that made Salvatore's blood run cold. Romano, Lucia Maria Captain, Italian Army Medical Corps Service, 2012-2019, deployments, Afghanistan, 3 tours, decorations, silver medal for military valor, Cross of Army Merit status, KIA, corrected. Honorable discharge, medical notes, mice identified as casualty following IED attack, Kandahar Province, 2018. Sole survivor of transport unit. 6, KIA. Recommended for psychological evaluation. Cleared for discharge 2019. No follow-up support authorized. Salvatore read the file twice, then a third time. An abandoned hero. That's what Lucia Romano was. She'd served her country, survived when 6 men under her care hadn't, come home broken, and been thrown away like trash when she was no longer useful. And she'd saved his daughters without asking for a single fucking thing in return. While he, the great Salvatore De Luca, the man who commanded armies of criminals and controlled politicians and judges, had fired her for making his children laugh. He stood up. "Get the car," he said. "I'm going alone." Marco blinked. "Boss, that's not—" "Alone," Salvatore repeated. For the first time in 20 years, he was going to face someone without power, without guards, without anything but the truth, and he had no idea if she'd even open the door. The house swallowed sound again. Too fast. Too complete. Salvatore stood outside the twins' bedroom at 7 in the morning, his hand raised to knock, and heard nothing. No breathing, no movement, no whispered conversations in the pre-dawn darkness the way children sometimes did. Just silence. The kind of silence that had ruled this villa for 2 years before Lucia Romano hummed her way through it. He knocked anyway. "Chiara, Sophia, breakfast is ready." Nothing. He opened the door. Both girls were awake. He could tell by the way they lay too still, their eyes fixed on the ceiling, their small bodies rigid under matching white quilts. They didn't turn when he entered, didn't acknowledge his presence. They'd gone back inside themselves. "I made eggs," Salvatore tried, his voice sounding foreign in the stillness. "The way you used to like them, with cheese." Sophia's eyes closed. Chiara pulled the blanket over her head. He stood there for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years, then quietly closed the door. By noon, neither child had eaten. The kitchen staff reported that Chiara had come downstairs once, looked at the table where Lucia used to sit with them during meals, and walked back upstairs without a word. Sophia hadn't left her bed. By evening, the villa felt like a tomb. Salvatore tried everything he'd never tried before. He sat on the floor outside their room and talked through the door. Told them about their mother, stories he'd locked away because remembering hurt too much. How she'd laughed, how she'd sung, how she'd made him believe he could be more than what Sicily had made him. The twins didn't respond. He brought up dinner himself, pasta with butter, plain and simple, the way they'd eaten it as babies. The plates sat untouched outside their door until morning. He called the best child psychologist in Palermo. The woman arrived with credentials and kind eyes and a suitcase full of toys designed to make children open up. The twins stared at the wall. After 2 hours, the psychologist left with a bill for 3,000 euros and a gentle suggestion that maybe Salvatore should consider what changed in the household recently. "I know what changed," he wanted to scream. "I destroyed it myself." At midnight, he stood in the kitchen where he'd found them laughing 2 days ago. The flour had been cleaned up, the butter put away, the bread long since gone stale. Everything was back to the way it should be. Ordered, controlled, perfect, and completely fucking dead. Salvatore pressed his palms against the marble counter where his daughters had stood barefoot and singing, and tried to remember the last time he'd heard them laugh before Lucia. He couldn't. The sound had been erased from his memory like it had never existed. 2 years of silence, broken for 6 weeks, then returned with interest. He looked down and saw his reflection in the polished marble, distorted, dark, monstrous. The house was quiet again, the way he'd always wanted it, the way he'd always needed it to be to survive in a world where noise got people killed. But his daughters weren't surviving. They were barely breathing, and it was his fault. Salvatore's phone buzzed in his pocket. Marco's name on the screen. Found her, sending address. His hand tightened on the counter until his knuckles went white. He could go to her. He could apologize. He could beg. But what right did he have? What right did a monster have to ask a hero for mercy? Upstairs, behind a closed bedroom door, Chiara whispered into the darkness. Lucia promised she wouldn't leave. Sophia didn't answer. She never did anymore. 3 a.m. came like a sentencing. Salvatore sat alone in the darkness of his study, the address Marco had sent him glowing on his phone screen. An apartment building in the old quarter of Palermo. 3rd floor, no security. The kind of place people lived when they'd run out of options. A decorated war veteran living in a walk-up with water-stained walls. While he sat in a marble villa overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea. The injustice of it burned in his chest. He should go to her now. Tonight. Apologize before the sun came up and made him face another day of his daughter's silence. His finger hovered over the address. Then he heard footsteps. Small, uneven, hesitant. Salvatore looked up to find Chiara standing in his study doorway. She was wearing the yellow nightgown Lucia had helped her pick out 3 weeks ago during a rare shopping trip. Her feet were bare. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, tangled from tossing in bed. Her face was swollen from crying, but her eyes were dry now, empty. Chiara, Salvatore started, setting his phone down. You should be sleeping. I hate you. The words came out flat, not screamed like before, not sobbed, just stated, a fact delivered with the same emotional weight as saying the sky was blue or the sea was salt. I hate you. Salvatore's breath stopped in his chest. Chiara, I hate you, she repeated, taking one step into the study. I hate that you made her leave. I hate that you're always gone. I hate that Mama died and you didn't. I hate that you never sing. I hate that Sophia won't talk anymore because she thinks if she does, you'll take that away too. Each sentence landed like a bullet. Salvatore tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't work. I hate, Chiara continued, her voice starting to shake now, that you came home and ruined everything. We were happy. For the first time since Mama died, we were happy. And you, her voice cracked, you killed it. 7 years old. His daughter was 7 years old, and she'd just put into words what he'd spent 2 years running from. He was the common denominator in every loss they'd suffered. Their mother died because of him. Their silence existed because of him. Their healing ended because of him. He was the problem. I'm sorry, Salvatore heard himself say, and the words felt like pulling glass from a wound. Chiara, I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't bring her back. I know. Sorry doesn't make Sophia talk. I know. Sorry doesn't... Chiara's face crumpled. Sorry doesn't make it stop hurting, Papa. Nothing makes it stop hurting except Lucia, and you made her go. She started crying then, not the hysterical sobbing from before. Quiet, broken crying that somehow sounded worse. Salvatore moved without thinking, crossing the study, dropping to his knees in front of his daughter. She didn't run, but she didn't come to him either. She just stood there, crying, while he knelt at her feet like a penitent at confession. I'm going to fix this, he said, his voice raw. I swear to you, Bambina, I'm going to fix this. You can't fix anything, Chiara whispered. You just break things. The words destroyed him. I know, Salvatore admitted. I know I do, but I'm going to try anyway. Will you? His throat closed. Will you let me try? Chiara looked at him with her mother's eyes. Bring her back, she said simply. Bring Lucia back, and maybe... She wiped her nose on her sleeve. Maybe I'll try not to hate you. She turned and walked out, left him kneeling on his study floor at 3 a.m. with the truth of what he'd become staring him in the face. A man his own daughter hated. A man who destroyed the only good thing that had happened to his children in 2 years. A man who had one chance left to become something worth forgiving. Salvatore picked up his phone, looked at the address, and made a decision that would either save his family or prove Chiara right. By 4 a.m., he was in his car. No guards, no driver, no gun. Just a man driving through pre-dawn Palermo toward the only person who could tell him if redemption was even possible. The apartment building looked worse in person. Salvatore parked his car 3 blocks away. The Mercedes would get stripped in this neighborhood, and walked through streets that smelled like garbage and desperation. Graffiti covered the walls. Broken glass glittered in doorways. A few early morning workers shuffled past without looking at him. This was the Palermo tourists never saw. The one people like him usually controlled from a distance. Lucia Romano's building stood narrow and crooked between a closed butcher shop and a laundromat advertising 24 horas in faded letters. The front door hung slightly ajar, the lock broken. Salvatore stepped inside. The stairwell smelled like mold and old cooking oil. He climbed, 3rd floor, apartment 3C. He stood outside her door for a full minute, his hand raised to knock, trying to figure out what the hell he was going to say. I'm sorry I fired you for saving my daughters. Please come back so my 7-year-old won't hate me. I read your service file and I'm a piece of shit. None of it sounded right. None of it was enough. He knocked anyway. Footsteps inside. Deliberate. Cautious. The door opened. Lucia Romano stood in the doorway wearing civilian clothes, worn jeans, a faded Army Medical Corps t-shirt with a hole near the collar, bare feet. Her dark hair was pulled back loosely. No makeup, no armor. She looked exhausted and completely unsurprised to see him. Mr. De Luca, she said evenly. Not sir this time. Captain Romano, he replied. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. You read the file? She said. I did. And now you're here to, what, offer me money, a better apartment, a job reference? No. Lucia waited. Salvatore realized he'd never done this before. Apologized to someone without leverage, without the weight of his name or his money or the implicit threat of what he could do if they refused to accept. Just apologized. I came to say I'm sorry, he said finally, and to ask. His voice caught. To ask if there's any way you'd consider coming back. Why? The question was direct, clinical. Because my daughters need you. They needed me 2 days ago. You fired me anyway. I know. Because you were threatened by a maid making your children laugh. It wasn't a question. Salvatore forced himself to hold her gaze. Yes, he admitted. I was threatened, and I was wrong. Lucia leaned against the doorframe, studying him the way he imagined she'd studied wounded soldiers, assessing damage, calculating survival odds. You know what they taught us in combat medicine? She said quietly. First rule, stop the bleeding. Second rule, don't make it worse. She paused. You made it worse, Mr. De Luca. I know. Those girls were healing. Slowly, carefully, one small moment at a time. And you ripped it all away because your pride couldn't handle the fact that someone else succeeded where you failed. Every word was a scalpel. Precise. True. Cutting deep. I know, Salvatore said again. Because what else could he say? So why? Lucia asked. Should I believe this time would be different? Because... He stopped, started over. Because my daughter told me she hates me. And she's right too. And I can't. His hands clenched at his sides. I can't lose them the way I lost their mother. I can't watch them disappear into silence again. I can't be the reason they stop living. Then step back, Lucia said simply. What? You want them to heal? Then get out of the way. Go back to your operations, your business. Whatever it is you do that keeps you gone for days at a time. Leave them with people who actually know how to help. It was exactly what he'd been doing for 2 years, and it had failed. No, Salvatore said. Lucia's eyebrows rose slightly. No? I need to learn how to be their father again, not their security. Not their provider, their father. He met her eyes. And I don't know how to do that. But you do. I'm not a therapist, Mr. De Luca. No, you're better. You're someone who understands trauma, who doesn't force people to talk before they're ready, who just... He gestured helplessly. Who just stays? Lucia was quiet for a long moment. Chiara spoke. She said finally. She did. What did she say? That she hates me, and that if I bring you back, maybe she'll try not to. Something almost like a smile crossed Lucia's face. Smart girl. She is. Another long silence. Then Lucia asked the question that mattered. If I come back, it's not as your maid. Then what? Family, she said quietly. Or nothing at all. Salvatore nodded slowly. Okay. And you don't fire me again, ever. Not when you're threatened. Not when you're angry. Not when I make decisions about those girls that you don't like. Agreed. And you come home, really home. Not just visits between jobs. You learn to be present. That was the hardest one. Being present meant being vulnerable. Being vulnerable meant being weak, and weakness got people killed. But his daughters were already dying, just slower. Yes, he said. Lucia studied him for another moment, then stepped back from the door. Give me 10 minutes to pack. They didn't speak during the drive back to the villa. Lucia sat in the passenger seat of Salvatore's Mercedes, a small duffel bag at her feet containing everything she owned that mattered. Her military medals, a photograph of her unit before Kandahar, the worn copy of a medical manual she'd studied until the pages fell apart, and a small music box that played Nina Nana. She'd bought it in a market in Kabul from a vendor who'd smiled when she explained it was for homesick soldiers. Now it was for homesick children. Salvatore drove carefully through the early morning streets, his hands steady on the wheel, his jaw tight. He looked like a man driving toward a firing squad. They might not forgive me, he said finally, breaking the silence as they reached the coastal road. No, Lucia agreed. They might not. They might not even speak to me. Possibly. So why are you coming back? Lucia looked out at the Tyrrhenian Sea, just visible as the sun began to rise. Because children shouldn't have to choose between healing and having a father, she said quietly, and because I made them a promise. To stay? To stay, she confirmed. And I don't break promises to people who need me. Salvatore's hands tightened on the wheel. I read about Kandahar, he said. The IED, the men you lost. Lucia went still. Then you know I failed them. You survived. 6 men didn't. That wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? Lucia turned to look at him. I was the ranking medical officer. I made the call to take that route. I was responsible for their safety. You were responsible for treating their wounds, not for predicting improvised explosives. Tell that to their families. The bitterness in her voice was familiar. Salvatore recognized it because he heard it in his own. You know what I think? He said. I think we're both carrying bodies that aren't ours to carry. Lucia didn't respond. My wife died because someone put a bomb in her car. Salvatore continued. It was meant for me. The target was always me. But she's the one who died, and my daughters are the ones who paid the price. I've spent 2 years telling myself it was my fault for being what I am. It was, Lucia said bluntly. I know, but what you said in that doorway, about stopping the bleeding and not making it worse, that applies to guilt too, doesn't it? Lucia was quiet for a moment. You can't save people by destroying yourself, she said finally. I learned that the hard way. After Kandahar, I tried to work harder, longer, better. Tried to be perfect so I'd never lose anyone again. It broke me. What fixed you? Nothing fixed me, Lucia said. I'm still broken. But your daughters needed someone who understood being broken. So I showed up anyway. Salvatore pulled through the villa gates as they opened. The sun was fully up now, painting the marble courtyard gold. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, putting the car in park. How to be what they need. Neither do I, Lucia said. But that's not what they need anyway. Then what? They need you to try, to fail, to keep trying anyway. She picked up her duffel bag. They need you to be human instead of powerful. I don't know if I can be. Then learn. Lucia opened the car door. You learned how to build an empire. You can learn how to build a family. She stepped out. Salvatore sat there for a moment, watching her walk toward the villa entrance with her military posture, and her worn duffel bag, and her complete lack of fear. Then he followed. They found the twins in the kitchen. Both girls were sitting at the table where Lucia used to sit with them during meals, staring at empty plates. They weren't eating, weren't speaking, just waiting. The moment Lucia stepped through the doorway, 2 heads snapped up. For one suspended heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Sophia screamed, Lucia! Both girls launched themselves from their chairs, running across the marble floor, bare feet slapping stone. They hit Lucia like a wave, wrapping around her legs, her waist, her arms, wherever they could reach, sobbing and laughing and talking over each other in a rush of words that had been locked inside for 2 days. You came back. Thought you were gone forever. Papa said he'd fix it, but I didn't believe. Missed you so much. Lucia dropped to her knees, pulling both girls into her arms, and let them cry. Over their heads, she met Salvatore's eyes. He stood in the doorway, watching his daughters cling to someone else, and for the first time in 2 years, he didn't feel jealous. He felt grateful. Thank you, he mouthed. Lucia nodded once. Then Chiara pulled back, her face streaked with tears, and looked past Lucia to her father. You brought her back, she said. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't hate either. I did, Salvatore said. Why? Because you were right. Sorry isn't enough. Action is. Chiara studied him with those 2 old eyes. Then she held out her hand. Okay, she said quietly. You can try. Salvatore crossed the kitchen and knelt beside Lucia and his daughters. He took Chiara's small hand in his. Sophia watched him warily, but didn't pull away when he rested his other hand gently on her shoulder. I'm going to make mistakes, he said. A lot of them. but I'm going to be here. Really here. Is that enough? We'll see, Chiara said. It was the most honest answer he'd ever heard. 3 weeks passed. The villa changed slowly, the way ice melts in spring. Not all at once, but in small moments that accumulated into something different. Salvatore came home every night. Not late. Not after the twins were asleep. Home. He sat at the kitchen table during dinner and listened to Sofia explain her drawings in excruciating detail. He helped Chiara with homework he didn't understand and had to ask Lucia to explain. He learned that bedtime required 3 stories, not 1, and that the twins had strong opinions about which books were acceptable. He was terrible at it. He forgot to check Sofia's backpack, and she missed picture day. He burned the pasta so badly the smoke alarm went off. He accidentally used Chiara's favorite shirt as a rag when cleaning up a spill. But he showed up every day, and slowly, so slowly he almost didn't notice, his daughters started to let him in. Chiara stopped flinching when he entered a room. Sofia started bringing her drawings to him first, before Lucia. They weren't calling him Papa with warmth yet, but the word had lost its sharp edges. Progress. Lucia moved into the guest suite permanently. Not as a maid, as family. She had dinner with them every night. She taught the twins to make bread the way her grandmother had taught her. She hummed lullabies while they did homework. And she watched Salvatore learn to be a father with the same patient attention she'd once given to wounded soldiers. "You're doing better," she told him one evening after the twins had gone to bed. They were in the kitchen, the same kitchen where everything had broken and begun to heal, cleaning up after dinner. "I'm still terrible at this," Salvatore said, scrubbing a pot. "You're less terrible every day." That's not exactly a ringing endorsement. It's the only one that matters. Lucia dried a plate. Being a parent isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. Salvatore set down the pot. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you really come back? The truth." Lucia was quiet for a moment. "Because I know what it's like to be abandoned by people who were supposed to care," she said finally. "And I couldn't do that to them, even if it meant dealing with you." "Dealing with me? You're not easy, Mr. De Luca." "Salvatore," he corrected. "If you're family, you should use my name." "Salvatore." Then, she met his eyes. "You're not easy. You're controlling and paranoid, and you have trust issues that probably need professional help. But you're trying, and that's more than most men in your position would do." "My position?" "Men with power," Lucia clarified. "They don't usually choose to be vulnerable. It's why most of them die alone." The words hung between them. "Is that what you think will happen to me?" Salvatore asked. "Not if you keep choosing differently," Lucia said. "Not if you keep choosing them." From upstairs came the sound of small feet running. "Lucia!" Sofia's voice called. "I had a bad dream." "Coming." Lucia set down the towel and headed for the stairs. She paused in the doorway. "Thank you," Salvatore said, "for staying, for—" He gestured helplessly. "For all of it." "Thank me by not screwing it up again," Lucia said, but she smiled slightly. Then she was gone, her footsteps on the stairs soft and sure. Salvatore finished cleaning the kitchen alone. Through the window, he could see the Tyrrhenian Sea reflecting moonlight, calm and endless. Inside, he could hear Lucia's voice upstairs, humming the lullaby that had brought his daughters back from silence. "Ninna nana, ninna oh." For the first time in 2 years, the villa felt like a home. But Sicily never forgets. In a car parked 300 meters from the villa gates, Two men sat in darkness, watching, waiting. "He's home every night now," the driver said. "I see that. Same schedule, same patterns. Predictable. The kids go to the same school. Same route, same time. And the woman? Former military, Italian army, combat experience. Interesting." The passenger lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating a face that had seen worse things than most men imagined. "Salvatore De Luca is making himself vulnerable," he said, smoke curling from his lips. "After 2 years of being untouchable, he's suddenly got routines, schedules, people he cares about. Weaknesses. Exactly. What's the boss want us to do?" The passenger smiled. "Watch, document, report. And when the time is right..." He flicked ash out the window. "We remind Salvatore why men like him don't get to have normal lives." The driver started the car. They pulled away from the villa, headlights off, disappearing into the Sicilian night. Inside, Salvatore tucked Chiara back into bed after her sister's nightmare had woken her too. "Papa?" she said quietly. "Yes. Bambina? Are you going to stay? Really stay?" He smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "I'm going to try." "Promise?" Salvatore thought about all the promises he'd broken, all the people he'd failed, all the ways men like him destroyed everything they touched. But he looked at his daughter's face in the moonlight and made a promise anyway. "I promise." Chiara smiled, not completely, not without reservation. But it was a start. He kissed her forehead and stood to leave. "Papa?" she called again. "Yes?" "I don't hate you anymore." The words hit him like absolution. "Thank you," he whispered. He closed the door quietly. In the hallway, Lucia stood waiting, Sophia asleep in her arms. "She's getting too big for me to carry," Lucia said softly. "Let me," Salvatore offered. Lucia transferred the sleeping child carefully. Sophia stirred, murmuring something unintelligible, then settled against her father's chest. Salvatore stood very still, feeling the weight of his daughter in his arms, her heartbeat against his, her breath warm on his neck. This was what he'd been missing. Not power, not control. This. "You're doing good," Lucia said quietly. "We're doing good," Salvatore corrected. She smiled. "Yes, we are." Outside, the Sicilian night pressed against the windows. Inside, a broken family was learning to heal. And in the darkness between those two truths, something dangerous was waiting. Because peace, in Sicily, was never permanent. It was only the pause before the next war. But for tonight, for this moment, Salvatore De Luca held his daughter close and let himself believe that love might be stronger than the violence he'd built his life on. Time would tell if he was right, or if the shadows would come for everything he'd learned to cherish.